In early 1940, Belgium possessed what many military experts considered the most impregnable fortress in Europe, Fort Eben-Emael. Its concrete walls and underground bunkers dominated the Albert Canal, guarding the crucial bridges Germany would need to cross if it intended to conquer Western Europe. The fort was a symbol of Belgian engineering power and of French confidence. It was believed that no enemy could breach it, let alone quickly. The fort was enormous, large enough to house over 1,000 soldiers in deep subterranean galleries carved meters below ground. Its artillery batteries could rain fire on any invader attempting to seize the three canal bridges nearby, Vrouwenhoven, Veldwezelt, and Caen. Belgian officers often said that if Germany tried to attack the position, they would be crushed before they set foot on the western bank. But 300 miles away in Berlin, a different opinion had formed. Adolf Hitler demanded a plan that would break the Allied defensive line in a single morning. His generals initially proposed standard infantry assaults and heavy bombings, both slow and bloody. Hitler rejected them. Instead, he turned to an elite group that the world barely knew existed, the German Fallschirmjäger, airborne shock troops trained to strike where enemies felt safest. At a secret training compound, a small hand-picked assault force was brought together, just 85 men. They were told they would take part in a mission that could determine the success or failure of the entire invasion of Western Europe. Their target was Eben-Emael. The soldiers were stunned. Attack the strongest fort in Europe with fewer than 100 men? It sounded suicidal. But then the officers unveiled the weapon that would change warfare forever, the shaped charge, a new explosive that could punch through meters of reinforced concrete like a spear of molten metal. The men stared at the prototype devices, bulky, silent, and terrifying. And their orders were simple. They would land directly on the fort, eliminate its artillery within minutes, and clear the path for German troops to storm across Belgium. A fortress built to withstand armies was about to be challenged by a handful of gliders. May 10, 1940. The sky above Germany was moonless, cold, and silent, perfect for what was about to unfold. The 85 Fallschirmjäger selected for the mission waited on a dimly lit airfield, their gear heavy with explosives and ammunition. But unlike typical paratroopers, they carried no parachutes for jumping. Instead, their transport stood before them, DFS-230 gliders, silent aircraft without engines, designed to drift like ghosts over enemy lines. Each was towed by a lumbering Junkers Ju-52. At a signal, the horn sounded once. Engines roared alive. Squad leader Oberleutnant Rudolf Witzig, calm yet steel-eyed, gathered his men around one last time. He reminded them that surprise was their greatest weapon, and that every second would count once they touched down. If the Belgians recovered fast enough to man their guns, the mission would end in a massacre. One soldier was overheard whispering a prayer. Another checked his shaped charge again and again, palms slick with sweat. Shortly after 3 a.m., the gliders began to roll, wheels rattling loudly before the nose abruptly lifted into the darkness. The Ju-52s climbed steadily, towing their silent cargo toward Belgium. Inside each glider, the Fallschirmjäger sat strapped to their seats, feeling every vibration, every shift in air pressure. The cold bit hard at their faces. The plan was breathtakingly precise. They would approach Eben-Emael at treetop height, invisible to radar. Release points were timed to the second. Each squad would land directly on top of their designated artillery casemate. Explosives would detonate within minutes of landing. Belgian guns must never fire a single coordinated volley. As the formation passed over the German border, radio silence was absolute. The Ju-52 pilots navigated only by faint lights on the ground. Then, at 4:25 a.m., Witzig's glider experienced a brutal jolt. The tow rope snapped. The lead assault glider, the one carrying the commander, suddenly dropped, powerless, into the black void below. Witzig and his squad were drifting into the unknown, far, far short of their target. But the rest of the formation pressed on. There was no aborting this mission. Ahead of them, bathed faintly in the first hint of dawn, lay the colossal shape of Fort Eben-Emael, the fortress that believed it could never fall. And the silent wings were coming for it. At 4:30 a.m., the remaining gliders swept low over the Albert Canal, their wings nearly brushing treetops. The pilots held their breath. One mistake and they would smash into the water or canal berms. But they stayed on course, gliding silently toward a fortress whose garrison was still asleep. Searchlights remained dark. Anti-air crews had no idea death was floating above them. Then impact. One by one, the gliders slammed onto the grassy, uneven rooftop of Fort Eben-Emael. Skids scraped concrete, metal crunched, soldiers were thrown forward, but they were down. The Fallschirmjäger burst from the gliders before they fully stopped moving. Helmets on, weapons raised, explosives strapped to their bodies like human demolition kits. Belgian guards, stunned and confused, could only stare for a heartbeat. What were German troops doing on top of the fort? That second of hesitation was fatal. The paratroopers charged, splitting into assault teams exactly as planned. Team Granite. Their mission: destroy the massive artillery casemates that commanded the bridges. Team Iron. Assigned to neutralize the observation posts and blind the defenders. Team Steel. Responsible for sealing bunker entrances and preventing reinforcements from reaching the roof. The first shaped charge was slapped onto a concrete turret, a small metal cone with a simple detonator. The soldier yanked the firing cord and dove behind cover. Boom! A searing jet of molten copper blasted straight down, slicing through thick concrete like butter. The fortress shook. Inside, Belgian soldiers were thrown off their beds, ears ringing, unaware of what was happening above. Machine gun fire stuttered back in panic, but the Germans kept moving, fast, precise, unstoppable. Every explosion was targeted. Every casemate they destroyed was one less Belgian gun able to protect the bridges from German armor racing to cross the canal. The plan was working, perfectly. Except for one thing. Witzig, the commander, was still missing. His team was stranded miles away. The men on the roof had to fight without him. And Eben-Emael was waking up. Inside Fort Eben-Emael, chaos reigned. Belgian soldiers scrambled through dim concrete corridors, grabbing rifles and gas masks, unsure whether they were under air attack, sabotage, or both. Officers shouted conflicting orders as they tried to make sense of the deafening explosions coming from the roof. At first, some believed the fort's own guns were malfunctioning. Then came the chilling report. Enemy troops on the surface! Germans have landed on the fort! That message sent a wave of disbelief through the underground galleries. The fortress was supposed to be immune to direct assault. No one considered the roof vulnerable. Elevators and stairwells leading upward were quickly packed with defenders eager to repel the invaders. But the Fallschirmjäger were already a step ahead. Team Steel moved swiftly, planting explosives and grenades at every hatch or vent they found. When Belgian troops reached the top, the first thing they met was blinding smoke and flying steel. Boom! Another blast sealed a major exit shaft. Boom! A machine gun nest went dark instantly. On the roof, German soldiers sprinted across open ground under bursts of scattered defensive fire, using the fort's own steel cupolas as cover. The shaped charges had already crippled several key bunker turrets, giant guns that the Allies counted on to blunt a German advance. Without them, the nearby bridges were now defenseless. Still, not everything went smoothly. One team struggled to breach a heavily reinforced position known as Blockhouse 120, its garrison firing fiercely from narrow slits. Every attempt to plant charges was met with bullets whistling past helmets. Grenades thrown inside were kicked back out, landing dangerously close. A German corporal was struck in the leg and fell hard. His teammates dragged him behind cover as he gritted his teeth, refusing to scream. They patched him up in seconds. There was no time for fear. Below ground, Belgian officers finally organized a counterattack. A large group of defenders climbed a stairwell to reach the central roof area, only to find a German-shaped charge already waiting. The explosion killed some instantly, wounded many others, and sealed the passage with crushed concrete. The Belgians now understood the terrifying truth. They were trapped in their own fortress. Up above, despite growing resistance, the Fallschirmjäger held fast. But their commander was still gone. Ammunition was being burned rapidly. and they knew reinforcements for both sides were racing toward the battlefield. The mission was far from won. On the ground, the situation was hanging by a thread. The Fallschirmjäger were winning the rooftop battle, but every minute increased the risk of Belgian counterattacks or artillery from neighboring forts. Ammunition was already running low. The men were tired, bleeding, and breathing dust-filled air. But above the clouds, their commander had refused to be left behind. After crash landing miles short of the target, Oberleutnant Rudolf Witzig and his stranded squad radioed furiously for help. A daring Luftwaffe pilot answered. He swooped down with another Ju-52, the engines roaring as they skimmed dangerously low over German fields. Witzig and his men scrambled aboard, barely grabbing hold before the takeoff run ended. Against all flight regulations and common sense, the pilot turned toward Belgium, one glider short and now behind schedule. As they approached the fort, Witzig leaned out a side window, scanning the landscape below for the giant concrete structure. Smoke rose from its surface like black scars. The battle was underway. His men were already fighting for their lives. The pilot lined up the approach. No tow rope mishap this time. The glider detached and curved into a steep descent, heart-pounding seconds as the ground rushed up at terrifying speed. Slam! The skids gouged into concrete, and the glider screeched to a brutal halt. The door flew open, and Witzig jumped out, MP-38 raised. His arrival was like lightning striking the rooftop. The men spotted him and let out a cheer. Their leader, the one who planned every step of this insane assault, was finally here. With him came fresh explosives, fresh orders, fresh hope. Witzig didn't waste a breath. He sprinted to the most stubborn casemate, the one still spitting fire at his troops, and personally led the charge to take it down. He supervised placement of the next shaped charge, making sure the explosive cone was angled perfectly for maximum penetration. A deafening blast. Silence. Another Belgian gun lay dead. With their commander back and the hardest targets falling one by one, the mission regained its momentum. But the men knew they weren't done yet. They had won the roof, not the fort. Below them, hundreds of Belgian troops remained alive, frightened, and furious. And if those defenders found a way up, the Fallschirmjäger's stunning victory could still turn into a rooftop grave. Now fully aware of the assault above them, the Belgian defenders regrouped deeper inside the fort. Officers slammed fists on maps, shouting for radio contact with nearby units. Reinforcements were already scrambling from Liège. Infantry, artillery, even tanks, all racing to the scene. Eben-Emael might have been stunned, but it wasn't broken. Below the roof, Belgian crews worked frantically to bring secondary interior guns to bear. These weren't designed to shoot at enemies directly above, but the defenders tried anyway, firing wildly into concrete ceilings, hoping the shock alone might disorient the Germans. The fortress roared from within, steel, smoke, and fury. On the roof, small Belgian squads attempted desperate breakout attempts through partially blasted stairwells. Grenades rolled up, machine guns chattered, bullets ricocheted like angry hornets. A German soldier was hit in the shoulder and spun backward, cursing as a teammate dragged him behind a destroyed turret. Another was grazed across the helmet, the impact ringing like a bell in his skull. Still, the Fallschirmjäger held their ground. Their discipline and training were proving the difference. They darted from crater to crater, firing single precise bursts from their MP-38s, always moving, always pushing back the defenders. Any open hatch was met with a grenade or satchel charge, sealing the Belgians deeper in their underground maze. Yet time was becoming their enemy. By late morning, the sound of distant engines echoed across the horizon, Belgian armor closing in. If tanks managed to surround the fort, the small airborne force would be trapped with no way out. The plan had always relied on rapid relief, German ground troops seizing the vital canal bridges so reinforcements could punch through. But the battle for those bridges was still raging. In the sky, Belgian anti-air guns opened up. Flak bursts dotted the clouds. The Luftwaffe dropped smoke bombs in response, covering the fort with thick gray haze. It became hard to see, hard to breathe, hard to know where the next attack would come from. Inside his command post on the rooftop, Witzig studied the horizon anxiously. He knew his men had achieved the impossible, neutralizing the main guns of Eben-Emael, but they could still be wiped out before victory was secured. He squeezed his radio microphone and demanded a status update. A reply came back through static. "Bridge is secure, armor crossing now. Hold just a little longer." A little longer. If they could survive the next couple of hours, the strongest fortress in Europe would be defeated not by siege, but by airborne audacity. While the battle raged on the rooftop of Eben-Emael, another fight, just as crucial, was unfolding only a few kilometers away. The Albert Canal bridges, vital arteries for the German invasion, were supposed to be blown up the moment Belgian forces detected an attack. If even one bridge fell, it would slow or halt the German armored spearhead intended to punch into the heart of Belgium. But Hitler's plan had accounted for that too. Earlier that same morning, German commandos disguised in Belgian uniforms had already infiltrated near the bridges. When the first alarms sounded, those saboteurs lunged into action, cutting wires, killing sentries, and preventing demolition teams from triggering their explosives. Then the Fallschirmjäger glider teams supporting the main assault struck, diving onto the bridgeheads in a flurry of gunfire and surprise. Some landings were rough. One glider cartwheeled on impact, shattering into wooden splinters, but the men who crawled from the wreckage kept fighting. Belgian defenders fired desperately from bunkers and trenches along the canal banks. Machine guns hammered the air. Mortars thumped. A German soldier took a burst to the chest and fell into the water below, helmet glinting as he sank beneath the surface. Another, despite being grazed, reached the charge cables and hacked furiously with his knife until sparks flew. Every second the bridges remained intact was a victory. By 7 a.m., the first German armored vehicles reached the canal, Panzer IIIs and IVs growling forward under rising columns of dust. The sight of steel monsters emerging from the morning haze sent shockwaves through the Belgian lines. Infantry scattered, some taking cover, others fleeing into nearby fields. A single Belgian anti-tank gun crew stood their ground. They loaded, aimed, and fired, the shells slamming into a panzer and punching through its front plate. Flames burst from the turret as the crew bailed out, coughing black smoke. But more German tanks rolled on. Within minutes, the defenders at the bridges were overwhelmed, surrendering or retreating. The canal crossings, the keys to Eben-Emael's relief, were secure. German armor began to flood across. Now the clock swung in favor of the Fallschirmjäger. Reinforcements would soon reach the fort. The men on the roof, bruised, bloodied, and low on ammunition, saw the dust clouds moving closer and felt that bolt of adrenaline. They were no longer fighting alone. The jaws of the trap around Eben-Emael were finally closing. By midday, the battlefield around Eben-Emael had transformed. German infantry and armored columns now snaked across the canal, forming a tightening ring around the gargantuan fort. The Belgian units nearby, seeing their artillery silenced and their positions collapsing, had little hope of organizing a rescue. Underground, morale inside the fortress crumbled like shattered concrete. Belgian troops, breathing stale dust and listening to explosions hammering above, realized something horrifying. Their weapons, their pride, were dead. Their giant guns, once the guardians of Belgium's borders, now sat twisted and silent in their casemates. Food and water remained plentiful, but what good was that without a way to fight back? Radio requests for support came back with grim instructions. Hold as long as possible. But time no longer mattered. The Germans controlled the battlefield. Oberleutnant Witzig walked among his men, some bandaged, many exhausted, and reassured them the nightmare was nearly over. Their mission had been nothing short of historic. They had turned the fortress into a tomb of concrete and confusion, blocking every exit and keeping defenders helplessly trapped inside. Finally, at 12:30 p.m. on May 11, 1940, white flags appeared at several small rooftop vents. Slowly, hesitantly, the first Belgian officers emerged, weapons dropped, faces pale with disbelief. What they saw stunned them further. Not hundreds, not battalions, but dozens of German soldiers stood there, wounded, covered in dust, but victorious. A fortress built to withstand armies, defeated by fewer than 100 airborne shock troopers. Belgian Major Jotran, commanding the fort, reportedly shook his head and muttered, "It should have been impossible." The Fallschirmjäger didn't celebrate wildly. They were too tired, too aware of the enormity of what had happened. But a quiet pride coursed through them. History would remember this day. Hitler was informed immediately. His response was triumphant. The fort was taken by a handful of brave men. That message would soon become iconic propaganda. But the men who lived it knew the truth. It wasn't just bravery. It was innovation, precision, and an attack no defender ever imagined. Fort Eben-Emael, once Europe's strongest fortress, had fallen in less than 24 hours.